Hey y'all, it's the Island Simmer, and I'm here with my first voiceover ever. I'm so excited to introduce the LaRoux Legacy, a Sims 4 story based on the Black History Challenge created by faerie-tempest. It's a modified version of the Decades Challenge that reflects what life was like for Black people starting from 1870. So that was 5 years after slavery ended in the United States. I'm going to leave links to the challenge and to faerie-tempest's channel below, so definitely check out her challenge and her Black History Challenge Let's Play. So I actually just discovered this challenge like last month, and immediately I was obsessed. I actually do research on connections between the diaspora and our different histories, so I thought that doing this challenge would be a great way to incorporate some of that research into my gameplay. I'm not sure if this will be a Let's Play or a machinima yet, but I'll keep y'all posted on that. In the meantime, let's get into these Sims and their background stories. So first up we have Miss Sophia LaRoux. Sophia was born free to a Creole plantation owner and his enslaved African indigenous mistress in an area that I'm kind of comparing to New Orleans, Louisiana, or really anywhere along the Gulf. During the time of slavery, she was considered a free person of color, and free people of color were regarded as superior to fully Black people, whether they were free or enslaved, but slightly inferior to white people. So because of that, she was able to get a good education and other opportunities that free Black people and enslaved Black people, of course, didn't have access to. Creole women and Black women were legally required to cover their hair every day, except on Sundays. So as a way to push back Creole women specifically, who typically had access to nicer things, they would use like really beautiful, really colorful fabric for their head wraps. So in the video, you'll see that I gave Sophia really bright and colorful head wraps compared to some of the plainer head wraps that I could be using. She also has a few nice things from how she grew up, so some of her outfits are going to be a little nicer than what the average Black woman would wear at this time. So Sophia was accepted into the Creole community with open arms, but she never really felt fully comfortable around them. But laws back then kind of stopped free Black people and, of course, enslaved Black people from interacting with people of color. And so, I mean, it really did depend on where you were, but definitely enslaved Black people were not allowed to fraternize or hang out with free people of color. But that didn't stop her from, trying to reach out and still associating with them in secret. And she ended up falling in love with an enslaved man. That led to her eventually getting pregnant. And, she didn't want to get him in trouble because back then that could have meant death, right? So she kind of took everything that she could and she left the city without telling anybody. She was also afraid for her child, because depending on what that child looks like, potentially putting her child into a life much different than the life Sophia had growing up. So while she was pregnant and on the run, she stumbled onto a rural community of freed and escaped Black and indigenous people near the swamps, and they took her in. They helped deliver her baby. They helped her get back on her feet physically, financially, and spiritually after the rough pregnancy and the rough delivery that she experienced. While she was there, they taught her about their traditions and spiritual practices, and she was like really amazed to see how so many of the things that she had been doing without knowing where they came from, people like them, and also how many things she still had to learn about where she came from. A few years later, that little community was discovered by those in power, and everyone had to basically flee and escape because slavery was still legal here. So, those people in that community essentially were supposed to be working on plantations. So Sophia decided to go back where she came from because she knew that free women of color would have more freedom there. So she returns with her toddler and told everybody that she was whisked away in a whirlwind romance with a Creole man, and she had to come back after he passed away unexpectedly. And, explained her having money as like, you know, he left money for them when he passed, etc., etc. So a lot of people were suspicious of her story, but she was still able to become successful as a healer and an herbalist in that community in the early 1850s. By the late 1850s, she started using her own money to buy and free enslaved Black people, since Creole people in that area were legally allowed to own enslaved people. Creoles at the time were very religious for the most part, so she was already an outcast for having a kid out of wedlock, but this buying and freeing enslaved people made her even more of an outcast. So 1865, slavery ended in the United States, and in retaliation, you know, there were white people and free people of color who were upset at this like sudden economic loss, and they chased her out of the city. So her and her daughter were on the run again, but by this time her daughter is about 15. So like I said, this is my first voiceover, and I have to say that one of the first things that I've learned, my first lesson learned, is if I'm ever doing creative sim with a very specific intent or a specific niche, like a time period, for example, that when I create this new save file, I should also consider maybe removing some of the CC and custom content and mods that are not related to said niche topic to make it a lot easier to find custom content while I'm in creative sim, because a lot of what I had to edit out of this video was literally me just scrolling and looking, trying to find the right outfits for the time period. I got a lot of the custom content from faerie-tempest. She actually lists a lot of the CC that she uses. And I also kind of went on Google and just searched Sims for historical CC, and also searched like with the year or the years, the decade time period that I'm looking for. Most of the time I was led to Tumblr. There are literally Tumblrs where their entire mission, their entire Tumblr is about various historical custom content. So definitely check out faerie-tempest's channel. You'll be able to find the list of custom content that she left for everyone to use. Super accessible. I mean, I love that she lists it all out. I mean, she even has a spreadsheet where she's like showing you how she keeps track of the different generations. It's just a really, really awesome challenge. That it's really the first time I connected like this with the challenge. I don't know why. It was just instant. Maybe because it's kind of already related to something I like in real life. I love the fact that despite a lot of us coming from different countries, we have so much in common, which led to me kind of getting into this research area. And I am also an herbalist in real life. So a lot of real life elements being put into this story, and I think that's why I'm so like excited about it. I can be so creative because I really do know a lot about this topic. And so yeah, like as I talk it out, I really feel like this should be a machinima, right? Like I feel like I have so much that could be told better in a storytelling way than a let's play. You know, I mean, I love The Sims 4, but let's be real here. When we're talking about like realism, I almost feel like it's easier to fake realism in a Twitter story with screenshots or a machinima where you're kind of like putting things at certain angles and doing what you want them to do, or at least pretending like they're doing it. So still undecided, but as you can see, I guess it sounds like I'm leaning towards a machinima. I mean, I am a machinima girl. I'm already planning other machinimas, and I just feel like it lines up. I don't know. I as much as I love watching Let's Plays, I don't know if I'm a Let's Play person in terms of like trying to record myself playing. I feel like it's hard for someone who has attention issues or like struggles with multitasking. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it, but I think I do feel more comfortable with the machinima, just the idea of a machinima, because like I said, I'm already kind of shooting some other ones that I was already planning on releasing on this channel in a couple months. So maybe one day I will do another Let's Play, but I think for now, I don't know, I'm thinking I like the storytelling aspect of it. So we'll see. Anyways, her daughter, Sabine, who we'll see in a few, is very tenacious, very assertive, very strong-willed. Some people would call her hot-headed. She's a really hard worker, loves her mom to death. She really wants to be just like her mom. She's been studying under her mom for as long as she could remember. You know, when they were in that rural community in the swamps, she was what was called a swamper for her mother and other practitioners in the community. So that meant that she specialized in like picking herbs and roots and flowers and stuff from the swamps. You know, she would know what to use for what. She'd be able to identify plants just by looking at them or feeling them or smelling them. She was really an expert at any techniques, prayers, and whatnot that were needed, because they really valued that process, like everything in that process, from picking the plants to using the plants to make medicine to using the medicine, was a very respected practice. And so she really knew the techniques and stuff needed in order to properly pick things and use them, which was important to that spiritual community. After being on the run for a little bit, they finally found someone who could help them. Through the network of Creole people and freed people that Sophia had developed, they linked up with a young man that they freed almost a decade ago as a boy. He was a sharecropper at the time, and so he offered to let them stay on the land that he was sharecropping on. The deal was they would give him some money so that he could buy the equipment for the farm instead of having to rent it. That way, he would only have to give 1/3 of his yield to the sharecropper instead of 2/3. So for those of you who may not be familiar, sharecropping is what many free Black people had to do after slavery ended. Basically, a former plantation owner who, had a huge farm, didn't really have to be huge, but a former plantation owner who had any farmland, they lost all the people that they had, or most of the people that they had to work the farm. So what they ended up doing was they came up with this plan where they would rent or lease small plots of land on their farm to free Black people in exchange for 1/3 of whatever that they grow, right? The problem was a lot of Black people were poor back then. So, it's great, 1/3 of whatever I grow for being able to live on this plot of land, but they didn't have the equipment for farming because, like I said, they were formerly enslaved. Many of them didn't really have much to their name. However, former plantation owners had this equipment, so they would let the free Black people rent the equipment in exchange for another 1/3 of their yield. So by the end of growing season, you're leasing the land for 1/3 of your yield. You're also renting equipment that you need for farming for another 1/3 of your yield. So 2/3 of anything that you grow goes to this plantation owner whose land you're renting. That remaining 1/3 would have to be split between feeding yourselves and your household and making some kind of profit. So this is kind of the system that perpetually kept a lot of formerly enslaved people poor, because you barely have enough to really make a profit in the first place after you feed yourself. At this time, there were a lot of different people living in the same area, living in the same, cabins, living together, multi-generational sharecropping cabins, so to say. So there could easily have been, 5, 10 plus people that you have to feed with this 1/3 of a yield. So just brief little history on, what sharecropping was and why this is kind of central to this Black History Challenge at this time period. So back to the story. They agree to that deal. They give him the money so he's able to buy or purchase or rent the equipment without having to give up that extra third of his yield. And as a result, they get to live with him on his kind of rented property. After they do that deal, they soon find out that there are cohabitation rules for free Black people. So back then, Black people who were living together had to be married, and they were legally required to register their union. So in 1866, Sabine LaRoux married Omar DeSoto, who we'll introduce later in the video, out of convenience. And her mother finally got a chance to stop running, settle down, and really grow roots into a community again. This was a common thing for Black women to experience back then. It's a little different in this case because they are Creole, and I kind of have them going down a different path than your typical Creole people may have gone during that time. But for Black women, it was hard to get agricultural opportunities unless you were married to a man. So at this time, marriage in the Black community was actually encouraged and almost seen as necessary in order to kind of get that next step up and have some kind of economic success, whatever that looked like to you, or whatever it looked like at that time. So what started out as kind of, a marriage of convenience eventually developed into a full-blown romance. And by 1870, which is where the Black History Challenge starts, Sophia and Omar are deeply in love and ready to start a family. So this makes Sophia really happy. It's almost like she's so happy to see that Sabine is able to, marry the person that she loves and be with the person that she loves. And yeah, there might be some pushback from the Creole community, but truth be told, like I said earlier, they never really felt a part of that community anyway. Creole people, especially at that time, were very big on, marrying each other, staying within their community. They had a very specific culture that was very different from any of the, people who were fully white, fully indigenous, fully Black. They really did have a unique blend of cultures and traditions, and like I said, they were very religious. And the LaRouxs are very spiritual, they're very religious, but their religion doesn't necessarily align with what the Creole people at the time were kind of celebrating. And so one thing that I really can't wait to show in this story, whether it's a let's play, screenshots on Twitter, machinima, whatever, is the different spirituality aspects that I feel don't get talked about as much. Things that may be demonized in ways that they shouldn't be. So I can't wait to show that too. But yeah, so Sophia's really happy for Sabine and Omar. She sees a lot of herself in her daughter, of course, and how her daughter is very rebellious and is going to do what she wants to do regardless of what the law says. She's going to find a way to get around that. So Sophia really admires that about her daughter, and her daughter really admires that about her. So I really want to get across that despite a lot of the things that they've been through, they really do have such a strong relationship. And now that Sophia is kind of back, well, not back, but now that she's settled, one of the things that will be taking her through in her storyline is trying to track down Sabine's father, and see what happened to him, see if he's still alive now that it's kind of legal for them to be together. That's something that she's always wanted, And for a while, she thought that wouldn't be possible when they first left the city where she's from. But over the time, as things get better and easier for people of color and Black people, that's something that I think I want to show, that journey of what it's like to find people that you may have been disconnected with because of slavery and the difficulty in that process. And, you know, the historical records are not that great. I also want Sabine and Sophia to really find some community. You know, that's something that they only really had when they fled and they were on the run, living in that village community when Sabine was young. So I really want them to be able to try to find that too in this new area that they're living in with Omar. I think that would be great for both of them. And you always need friends, right? You always need community, you always need support, and you know, there's a point where you're really just trying to make it, and that's fine. But once you're settled, it's always nice to really try to grow some roots, and not just by having kids. You know, I think social support and community support is really important, and it was very important back then, as I mentioned, with the multi-generational homes and how they all supported each other. So that's something else that we're going to kind of explore in this story as well. Omar DeSoto represents the Black people who came to the U.S. from Africa by way of the Caribbean, who came to Louisiana after slavery ended in those respective countries, in those Caribbean countries. So he was born into slavery, was freed by Sophia LaRoux when he was about 14. And after he was freed, he wanted to try and find his family that he was separated from. But he soon realized that, you know, making money and finding housing and shelter was the priority. He struggled to get on his feet, and sharecropping really became his only option, which is kind of how they had to set up back then. The powers that be were very upset that people that they deemed inferior or people that they thought needed some kind of like guidance in life and didn't know how to do things on their own, which is a lot of how people kind of tried to justify getting slavery back. They're really upset at, you know, the fact that these people that we used to own are now able to move freely in society. How dare they, right? Omar honestly is just a good, honest man who is determined to be successful, so he can reunite with his family one day. And in terms of Sabine, he was actually in love with Sabine from day one. I mean, look at her. She's gorgeous. And she's a great person. She's very, like I said, strong-willed, which is different from a lot of the women that he had, you know, encountered before. She was assertive in a way that a lot of the people he knew weren't allowed to be. You know, part of kind of like that Creole upbringing, despite being on the run a lot and still kind of being like seen as a rebel in her community, she does belong to a different community. So there are differences there, and I can't wait to really explore that in this story, however it ends up looking like at the end, whether it's a Let's Play or, you know, a machinima or a Twitter story, even though I'm not really leaning towards doing that on Twitter. I have some other ideas for Twitter, so you should follow me on Twitter, island_simmer, so you can stay up to date on this story, whatever stories I end up doing in the future, because I do plan on having stories going on both my YouTube and my Twitter at the same time. So at island_simmer. Like I said, Omar was in love with Sabine from day one, but never acted on it until she made it clear that she wanted to do that too. You know, Sabine was a little young when they got married. She was 16 and he's about 22, but that was kind of common at that time. But by the time we kind of start their story in 1870, she's 20. And I did that on purpose. I wanted to, at some point, have her celebrate a significant birthday. And I know back then it was more so 18 than 21. But you know, for storyline purposes, just wanted it to be the 21st birthday. So can't wait for you all to see where this story goes. I can't wait to see where the story goes, because I'm going to be kind of making it up as I go and just adding in certain historical facts that I know to be true based on, just research that I've done and just, common Black history facts that I feel like a lot of us know just by virtue of growing up Black. So I'm so excited to share this story with you. Sub to my channel, follow me on Twitter, like I said, island_simmer, to stay up to date on whether this becomes a machinima or a let's play. Let me know what y'all think of The Sims in the comments. I'd love to hear y'all suggestions and feedback. My brain is like overflowing with all the ideas I have for this story, so I can't wait to see what y'all think. Anyways, thank you all for listening. Again, my name is The Island Simmer with the 1 instead of an I, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.